Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Yes, and I'm talking to you today. We're talking to you today about coaching perfectionism. And what I was going to say is, and I'm talking to you as a reformed perfectionist, or somebody at least that recognizes this very much in myself, as a coachee, as well as somebody who has coached a lot of clients that also experience that tendency towards perfectionism when they are triggered by stress.
It's definitely a place that I can go to. It's not my primary one, but perfectionism, I think, exists within a little bit. So what is perfectionism then? And I think there's probably a couple of elements to this. So firstly, it is a label. So we need to be careful of that because it's easy to label ourselves as things when actually they are not things in itself. It's something that needs to be defined. But some typical traits of perfectionism would be the need. Well, ultimately, it's the need to deliver a perfect result or to do something perfectly. And so there's a lot of pressure that comes with perfectionism and you put that pressure upon yourself, and it's that sort of essence that if things aren't done perfectly or you don't get the perfect result, then there is essentially a failure there, and that can take us to a place of experiencing shame or guilt or certainly feeling not enough. So perfectionism can be about the result, but it can also be about the process. It can be about the amount of knowledge perhaps that you have in needing to have all of the knowledge and all of the times. And if you don't, then you are not perfect. And therefore that can lead to, again, feelings of inadequacy. So perfectionism is often regarded, I think, in coachees as something that they don't want to have or as a problem, but equally it can be a source of strength. And we're going to explore a little bit around the edges of perfectionism, sharing some different perspectives. And just bringing this topic to life a little bit today.
Yeah, and I think I build on what you would say, think about my own experience. And I think perfectionism for me is around being perfect as much as it is, as an individual, as a human, as much as it is about producing perfect work. And I think it's probably a lot to do with safety. So psychological safety within yourself, I feel safe when, I'm okay when I am satisfied that something couldn't be any better. And it's very much, I think, related to criticism and, the fear of being criticized for something. But I would also say we wouldn't be here if we weren't reformed perfectionists, or at least maybe reformed isn't the right word, but it's more about aware, self-aware perfectionism, and being able to identify in ourselves when actually what can be an act of self-sabotage is starting to be triggered and rear up, and also then have the strategies to be able to move beyond that and take or engage in the perceived risk, because what all of this is really perception.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also let's talk a bit about where perfectionism shows up in coaching, because whilst you may have those clients that will arrive to coaching and say, oh, I am a perfectionist, I need some coaching on my perfectionism. Typically, it will arrive with people who are experiencing poor time management, a lack of ability to get things done, feeling overworked, overstretched, unappreciated, not having the work-life balance perhaps that they would want to have. And when you start to dig under the surface of those presenting challenges, what you find is there is a driving need in order to be perfect. So it's not that the person can't manage their time or can't make decisions about where to work, but there's like automatic behaviors at play, which, almost require that person to work on a piece of work, for many more hours perhaps than they would otherwise if they weren't experiencing perfectionism. So there's a time element where I think it shows up. How about you, Jo? What other ones would you say it shows up?
I think perfectionism can show up in a coaching relationship in resistance. Resistance to let go of like that kind of safety framework. And it could be even around wanting to have the perfect relationship with the coach in order to be able to engage fully in the work and take the risks that that are involved in engaging in change. I think the topics that people can bring related to this can be around boundaries, as you say, like what you say yes to, what you say no to, when is it enough. It will often show up as people not feeling good enough. Basically, in terms of beliefs, how might that show up? Fear of not being equal to others.
I think it also,
those are quite common things.
I think it also shows up in perhaps the way our clients might view others. So the client may not actually be coming with perfectionism as the problem. They might be coming with my team are inadequate as the problem, and experiencing that nobody else works to the same standards that they work to, and that is a frustration. And how can they get their team to work to the same standards that they work to? Now, as the coach, that is obviously a surface level goal that you could engage within. But if you dig beneath the surface, what you might find is your client is setting impossibly high standards for themselves and for others. And they could be a real challenge to work for, and so helping your client to expand awareness around the way that around the impact that they have, it can be an important part of that coaching journey. So I think what we're saying here is perfectionism shows up in lots of different ways. And that's what I said at the start. You can't label your client as a perfectionist, and your clients can't really label themselves as a perfectionist. We have to be able to define what do they mean by perfectionism? What do we mean by perfectionism? What are the different elements that we're seeing in our client that they identify as either being or doing perfectionism? So it's a huge topic, I think, to start with.
I think most clients, as you say, they don't come to coaching saying I'm a perfectionist and I don't want to be a perfectionist. I think where this actually arises in a coaching conversation is probably in the coach being able to share an observation, or like ask a question and saying, sharing an observation, which might be, I'm sensing a need for this to be perfect before you feel confident to take action, or or the need to be challenging in some respect. And all of a sudden the client then might say, yes, that is something that is important to me, and that shows up a lot. And then all of a sudden you kind of have this understanding, and that's where you then might be able to talk about normalizing that this is an automatic behavior for lots of people. It shows, it can be really helpful. Like a lot of people, high achievers, will have the driver that shows up when they are stressed will often be around a be perfect, and they will identify it as being a source of their success. And therefore it's quite frightening to think about being able to step away from that and make different choices and be equally successful, so without having to have the less than helpful characteristics that can be experienced when that be perfect is active.
And I think in terms of how you coach perfectionism, I think what you're alluding to there, Jo, is awareness. It's helping the client to really build awareness of their automatic behaviors and of the behaviors that they're perhaps using or doing that don't really serve them in the best possible way. So if you take the person who perhaps doesn't have strong boundaries, says yes when they mean no, or stays working late when they really want to get back, to be with their loved ones, it's helping the client to understand how come they're making those choices when they want something else. They're telling you they want something else, but they're still making those choices. So how come? Like, what are some of the reasons? What does it feel like to make those choices? What would the alternative choices be? And what would that mean? Because sometimes if you make a different choice, so let's say you're used to working late and what you want is to close your laptop at 5 p.m. Great. That sounds easy, doesn't it? Everyone can do that, except when you close your laptop at 5 o'clock, what might you then be met with? Perhaps you're met with anxiety around not being able to do what you had planned to do to the perfect degree. It might be anxiety around something having to be good enough instead of being perfect. And so you have to be able to support clients with almost like the aftermath of their choices, as well as being able to identify what the choices are that they want for themselves in the first place. So it's not as simple as clients being able to just do things. I mean, if clients could just do things, they would, right? If you could just start putting in place boundaries, everyone would be doing that. It's the part that is the alternative, what's going to happen when you do that, that often is where the coaching needs to take place.
I think awareness is that first step towards freedom. Once we can become aware of it, we can also engage in an act of befriending our be perfect, avatar, if you like, that might sit on a shoulder, recognize it, engage in a conversation with it, thank it, and also still make a different choice. I notice you, I understand why you're here. Like, what is the purpose that the Be Perfect driver is serving for you? And how can you get that need met in an alternative way? In coaching, we will explore with our clients what are their values, and we can look at the Be Perfect and how it does or doesn't honor those values. That can be an important step. Beliefs work is that transformational piece, because that Be Perfect doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of that kind of personality makeup. It's actually a decision, really, that we made at a point in time that served a positive purpose, but no longer perhaps serves that positive purpose for us. So what would it be more helpful for us to believe, and what do we want to believe moving forwards in order for us to be able to step outside of that automatic thinking pattern? What framework of beliefs would we need to have? And it's where reframing comes in as a useful skill. So reframing, what perfect means, or to enough, like how much is enough. Getting really specific can really help. Thinking through the consequences of things, thinking about the impact on other people. So I remember having a conversation with an old boss, and he's like, Jo, other people are actually intimidated by these reports that you're producing, which was not my intent at all, and totally unaligned to that people pleaser part of me. And I just thought I need to produce the best possible work that I can produce, because that will help the organization. And I was oblivious to the impact on others, unintentional as it was, that actually it was triggering a feeling of inadequacy, within others. So for me, instantly, when I had that awareness, it's like, well, that's a price too much to pay. Like, I could easily change what I'm producing, and also I can work with the other person to support them. But it was that awareness of the potential impact on others. And obviously it can have an impact in relationships other than work relationships as well, because a Be Perfect driver doesn't only show up in the workplace, it shows up in all relationships in our lives.
And I think that's a useful exploration in coaching as well, is to start to identify, where do those behaviors show up in your whole life? So you might easily be able to identify, okay, I need to get a grip on my perfectionism because it means I'm working too many hours. But actually that's too narrow a focus. If you change one slice of your behavior, it's not going to miraculously just stick. When you start to look at the theme or the trend or the pattern across your whole life, you're able to start to recognize, oh, hang on, perhaps this is an outdated strategy. This is me trying to serve a need that I once had, but I no longer have that need. And being able to recognize perhaps where that theme, pattern, or trend comes from, like to make full contact with, how come I've developed this as a strategy, this need to be perfect? Do I still have that same need? Actually, no, I don't think I do. Great. So how can you meet that need in a different way? So being able to take a look back in order to be able to look forward. But I do also think there's a piece around creating a burning platform for change, so like identifying that perfectionism is holding you back in some way. Well, what is it that you want instead? Because perfectionism probably got you to where you want to be. So now, where do you want to go? And what is that going to look like in terms of what you might want to change, adapt, or adjust? Because it's easier to keep the same patterns of behavior. So being able to help a client to really build out their future state, really understand their compelling motivation and reasons for change, I think is also a big important part of being able to move beyond certain behaviors that are probably ingrained in a lifetime of habit. So really building out that future is important too.
Yeah, and I'm sat here thinking about how, perfectionism is really a symptom. It's not the root cause. And so we coach the root cause. And that's about, first of all, identifying what is the root cause, because perfectionism shows up when we're stressed, when we're not the healthy version of ourselves. So, what is it that has triggered that in the first place? Let's take a look at that, whilst yes, we can look at that at those other things as well. So as coaches, we have a number of different lenses um, in time almost, when it was created in the past, what's the impact in the here and now, what is the future that you want to have. And it might be that it's showing up in perfectionism. I would want to have a contract with my client, which is that I can challenge them through the sessions if they have an awareness that the be perfect can show up, but they're not at the point yet where they can recognize it. Are they happy for me to challenge them if I think I hear it show up in our coaching sessions? And they will say, yes, that would be great. So then as I'm listening to them in a coaching session, and I might think, is that their healthy self or is that be perfect? And I will just inquire with them, and they might, then start to have raised their awareness. And sometimes they might say yes, and other times they might say no. They might say, no, actually, that's my pragmatic self. But all of a sudden, they then are starting to identify the other aspects of self that also play a part in their personality, because we're obviously not one dimensional. There's so many aspects to who we are and how we are.
And what do they want to keep, as well? Because if you take a whole label like perfectionism, right, I no longer want to be perfect, you're throwing out a huge amount of strengths with that as well, because perfectionism comes often with a very strong work ethic, a great attention to detail, a huge capacity for research and knowledge and expertise. So, when you take a label and think about changing a label, that's why it's really important that we break it down, because there are probably elements of that perfectionism that will continue to serve you well. Just as you're saying, like it's the, in times of stress, out come the unhelpful behaviors. But actually, when you're calm and you're balanced, they are also a source of your greatest strengths and talents. And I think it's being able to identify that it's not all evil. It's not all sabotage. There are strengths and talents within these sort of bucket labels as well.
And remember that in a coaching conversation, you are going to have ideally a mixture of that deep and meaningful, the challenge, that the stretch, and also lightness and laughter and humor, and a recognition of what it is to be human, and the complexities that there are, and that habits, and you might look at this as a habit in terms of way of thinking or being in the world, they take a while to change. And that's often why people come to work with a coach, is partly as an accountability partner, as well as an emotions partner, a strategic thought partner. And our role really is to enable our client to examine the be perfect, where it came from, the impact, what they want to do with it. It's not for us to have the answers, because each client is different and can change at a different rate. And even as they go through the coaching program, they might arrive saying, like, this is holding me back, this need to be perfect with everything, and it's I'm feeling like an imposter, and I think it's related to this. But as they go through a coaching program, they might shift their perception of this be perfect altogether, and, as you say, not want to move away from it, disown it, but just develop a different relationship with it. And that's their own journey of discovery to go on, that we as the coach facilitate.
Well, and that's perspective, isn't it? And that's really what coaching is about, is being able to look at, how is something helpful? How is something unhelpful? What do you want instead? How are you going to get there? What might that mean for you if you make those changes? What support would you need for that? Ultimately, it's coaching in a nutshell. And I think sometimes we can get put off by what our coaches bring to coaching, because maybe it exists within ourselves. And so, whilst perfectionism isn't a big one for me, if you took in my earlier days, like imposter would have been a bigger one for me. If I was trying to work with a client on their imposter, but I felt like an imposter myself, I'd go into brain freeze around, well, how am I going to help this client if they're trying to overcome the very same challenge that I have myself? And I think if you are a coach and you experience perfectionism with a client who is sat in front of you having the same challenge, that might be where that brain fog kind of comes from. And I think when we're in that space, it's remembering that we aren't there to have answers for our clients. We are there to facilitate questions and to facilitate different coaching tools and activities that can help the client to reach their own realizations, because somebody's realization about their own perfect behaviors will be entirely different to the ones that you might have about yours. And of course, if you find yourself in that space, go and get coaching for your own challenges, and that will help you to free up space for your clients as well.
Yeah, that identification is always a risk, isn't it? So we've got that, it can trigger that want to rescue, because if you're still experiencing it and actually deep down you'd like to be rescued from those feelings yourself, and so you provide to others what you think you would like to have, consciously or unconsciously. And then I think there's that over identification can also show up with, how much do you disclose as the coach to your coachee? So on the one hand, you could say, well, I can give you hope because I'm sat here as a reformed perfectionist, and that be it, and like a little smile, or it gives that can give that positivity to your coachee. Or you could say, oh yeah, I totally relate to that. I experience that all the time as well. Don't worry about it. You can still be successful with it. What else do you want to talk about today? and unintentionally dismiss something that actually is a pain point, maybe for the client. So it's making sure that the client is front and center, and also recognizing that sometimes coachees come and they bring these big signs. This is the thing I need to work on, and listening to that and exploring that, and also being able to have that that view and the possibility that there might also be some other things here that might come up, as I talked about earlier, like each individual thing doesn't exist in the vacuum. So even just asking, what else is this about? What needs do you have that aren't currently being met? What else would you like to share with me about your perfectionism? Just gentle inquiries that can enable the client to make contact with a new sense of understanding about what this behavior, automatic thinking process is connected to. And some clients, when they have the awareness, of course, are quite capable of doing the rest of the work themselves without you as the coach.
And I was just, as you were chatting there, I think there'll be coaches listening to this thinking, yeah, but what tools do you use? What coaching activities can you do? And that's the thing about coaching, isn't it? It's not about there is a tool for this and there is a tool for that. It's about being present with your clients and really listening to their unique experience of how things show up for them. And obviously you've got your go-to resources like your values, your beliefs, stuff from transactional analysis, stuff from Gestalt, in terms of where do they get stuck. But ultimately, it's about helping the client to find the answers within them that are going to be right for their particular scenario that they're bringing. So apologies that we haven't given you the answer, but we have given you lots of different ideas, perspectives, and avenues, I think, for exploring this topic of perfectionism and many other topics like it.
So whilst it might not be a perfect episode, hopefully it's good enough.
So listen, if you've enjoyed today's episode about perfectionism, come and check out our Coaching Crowd community, where we'll be connecting with lots of other coaches, all asking similar questions. It's a great community to be a part of.